Hi, welcome to the Go Higher Frequency Astrology channel. My name is Suzanne. Join me as I investigate how the monthly cycles are progressing with a focus on how we can use this energy more productively. Today, I'm going to be talking about a couple of important aspects that are happening next week, leading into the full moon in Sagittarius on May the 31st. Are we headed into further escalations with Iran? What about Cuba and Greenland? Why Trump's physical scheduled for the day of the Mars-Pluto square finally brings some hidden health news to light. Is the shared mythology of the United States as the leader of the free world breaking down? And how will that impact our monetary hegemony? Are we destroying the shared belief that we are the safest country to invest in? Will we experience a tech reset? Or will we continue with our delusions that throwing money at these monopolies is a good bet? But before I talk about the upcoming transits and full moon, I want to review the nodal switch that happened last week and how it has highlighted the disparity of those who can't seem to get enough money versus those who have barely enough to survive. I also want to review some of the major events that happened surrounding the new moon in Taurus, including an interview with Tucker Carlson and Kevin O'Leary, a Canadian who is developing that very unpopular data center in Utah. As always, I've included timestamps below, so feel free to skip around to the topics that interest you the most. Did you feel the nodal shift last week? Since the nodes were transitioning to themes addressing abundance or not, it was interesting that the inflation reports in the United States came in hotter than expected, pushing a market sell-off right before the new moon in Taurus. The report not only rattled the markets, but also sent the U.S. bond yields higher. And there's been a lot of noise about how much this administration is spending, like billions of dollars on these self-dealing settlements and things like ballrooms and arcs. So much money is being prioritized to these people, these elite leaders who can't seem to get enough money. I mean, it's mind-boggling to those who work for peanuts, basically, the rest of us who can barely afford food to be put on our table. This economy where prices are rising and they can't get access to healthcare. I just had an experience where we're one of the lucky ones. My husband has a pretty decent job and we're living off of his salary and he is able to get good health insurance. But I went to the doctor for my son's physical and my health insurance, which we pay a lot for, paid about $550 for that appointment. And the medical center charged us an extra $125 because I asked the doctor about vitamins and what she thought about the vitamins that my son was taking. He's a teenager, so he's starting to take more control over his own health. But of course, as a mother, I want to make sure that he's informed. And you can't even ask the doctor about vitamins without being charged over $100 on top of the money that we already pay. So it's no wonder that we're now prioritizing supposedly these cheaper AI systems. It depends on how you look at it. And people are asking these wellness influencers about their opinions about health because people can't afford it. And then the leaders of our country are basically diverting all of this money, billions of dollars. I can't even imagine that amount of money. They're diverting all of this money into their self-dealing and into golden statues of themselves. They cannot get enough. Whereas most people are basically fighting for peanuts, fighting for access to food, fighting for access to housing. These nodes are basically about abundance. And they're basically showing us this disparity, this really gross disparity, and putting it in our faces so that we can really feel it as a collective, this disparity. And what is abundance really at the end of the day? What is going to make you happy? It doesn't appear that the rich people are very happy. All they're doing is basically investing money into weapons and war and stealing other people's oil and hoarding the money. And they are not really happy. It's never enough. And the people that just need access to the bare minimum are unable to survive. But maybe they're happy in spite of it all, because abundance is much more about what it is that fulfills us at the end of the day. I mean, there's a bare minimum that you need from a resource standpoint. If you're not getting enough food, of course, you're not going to be happy. If you're just having to scrounge for the basic necessities, there is a limit to that. And so the nodes are really showing us the both sides and showing us how we need to create alliances with others sometimes, and they're not great alliances sometimes, to access the resources that we need. And before his trip to China, Trump messaged to the American people that he didn't think for a moment about their financial situation. He was purely focused on other countries like Iran. And that message did not go over well with the American people, because it's like he's kicking us in the face and basically saying, look, you need to prioritize worshiping me because here I am, I have other priorities and you don't really matter to me. The opposite of what he campaigned on. He just basically has abandoned all of the people who put him into power, except the very small minority, the tech elites, the elites that are connected to Israel, all of the people that have money and power in his little circle, the stock market. As long as the stock market is up, then he's winning, and he doesn't really care about the rest of us. So you're really seeing kind of the truth come out of him. Now, if you remember, I suggested that the meeting between Trump and Xi would take a softer, more diplomatic tone. At least temporary agreements would be made, and Xi would likely hold the cards. And that's exactly what happened. This eighth house theme of financial partnerships and the square the new moon made to the eclipse degree highlighted the disruption to national industries. And this was very much on display during this new moon. And the trip was viewed by the press as underwhelming for the US, with Xi Jinping setting the terms. At the meeting, she warned Trump about the dangers of falling into the Thucydides trap. And this trap refers to the historical pattern where a rising power, in this case China, threatens to displace an established ruling power. And in this case, it's us, the United States, creating structural stresses that almost inevitably drag the two nations into a catastrophic war. And that is the path that we are now on. She was pushing for a new paradigm in the ways the two powers negotiated with each other, basically seeking more respect for its status as an equal power. And the United States needs to honor that reality, or we're headed into this conflict that we keep going more and more quickly toward. So you may remember from my last video that Tucker Carlson's birthday fell on this new moon. And you know that it's really going sideways when you start paying attention to Tucker Carlson's interviews, which I have been, some of them. I am very curious about what he's saying, and some of the interviews are very interesting. And a couple of days before the new moon, he released an interview with this tech investor, Kevin O'Leary. You may remember him from the Shark Tank. He's Canadian, and he is building this massive data center in Utah, which has recently been approved for development, even though it got a ton of voter backlash and is extremely unpopular in Utah, except for a very small minority of wealthy individuals, including the governor. Jumping on the MAGA bandwagon, Kevin blamed this surge of unpopularity for his data center on lefty socialists and thought he was going to get a sympathetic ear from Tucker. Throughout the interview, you could tell he doesn't have much self-awareness. There's this overall sense of entitlement and doubling down within the tech elite, within all of the elite lately. They have this view that we're the ones that are entitled, but they really need to look at themselves in the mirror because they have this sense of entitlement because of their money and because we kind of depend on their businesses for our own money. Common theme plays out amongst them that they are being unfairly targeted, that we should all feel grateful that they are building businesses in our towns. And this really doesn't grasp that they're relying on our government and our taxes to build their businesses. They're relying on the labor from the people in the country. No matter where they build their businesses, they get a lot of tax breaks and they actually get a lot of benefits from the government, but they feel entitled to those benefits. They're not seeing themselves very clearly. They are just as entitled as they feel like we are. But because we don't have the kind of money or power that they do, they feel that they should call the shots. And Kevin was so delirious about beating China that he completely dismisses the public's overwhelming concerns about these energy hogging monoliths, which are leaking toxicity into the environment, into the land where people are living. And it's causing horrific noise pollution in these areas. No matter what Kevin O'Leary claims, he has a degree in environmental science. There's all of these things that he's basically touting this message that the data centers are not doing all these things. They're more advanced now. They're not doing all of these things that they get a bad rap for. Well, we're not seeing evidence of that. So no matter what Kevin O'Leary says, if the evidence isn't there, we are not going to trust that they have our best interests at heart. Basically, they need to build their homes near these data centers, and they need to live in the environments that they're polluting, I think, before we're going to trust what they say is true. They need to not get tax breaks for these monoliths. They're actually not providing the amount of jobs that deserve the kind of tax breaks that they're receiving for building these monoliths. And he speaks to the old USA, the one MAGA is intent on destroying, a place where everyone trusted their investments and everyone wanted to live. Yes, that was the United States, but that is being eroded right now pretty quickly. With no sense of irony, he says this is because we have laws and regulations in the United States, seemingly unaware of the fact that this has completely shifted with Trump's presidency. And one of the reasons he's able to develop this monolithic data center in the middle of the desert. Evan has an interesting chart. We don't have his time of birth, so I'm not even going to talk about the houses, but you see in his chart, he has a lot of security issues, themes around money and power. He has all of this energy on his south node in Cancer. He has just experienced a Jupiter return. He is a Uranus sun, and Uranus suns are going to buck the system. They're going to want to be involved in innovative industries. They're going to want to invest in technology. So you see that theme clearly present in his chart. But Uranus in Cancer is meant to upgrade traditions, upgrade, what they've inherited from their family, upgrade their connections to their family. He's not going to follow the traditions of his family. He's going to disrupt his security. He's going to want to upgrade it. And he's got the ruler of Cancer, the moon in Scorpio. Now, even though we don't have his time of birth, the moon could change a couple of degrees on either side, but it will still be in Scorpio. And the moon in Scorpio is definitely attuned to power dynamics and also has security issues. And it's doubly compounded by its conjunction to Saturn, and Saturn rules his north node in Capricorn. So he's got a restriction, a feeling of restriction to his security needs, very obsessed probably with having money and being able to wield power in a way that doesn't restrict him, because he has this internal restriction, did not feel a lot of nurturing from his mother or his family unit. So has this restriction built into him. And then he's got this Pluto Venus conjunction in Leo, which is another symbol of power and control, especially around money. And so it's no wonder that he's an investor with this kind of chart. And you see that the new moon was in square to this Venus-Pluto conjunction, and as well as Saturn in square to his nodes. And Saturn is very symbolic to his nodal journey because Saturn rules his north node. So he himself is at a crossroads between, relying on all of the traditions of his past versus taking responsibility and ownership for what he's creating in the world and what he's manifesting in the world. There's a lot of karma tied to his chart. So he himself is at a crossroads. And it's very interesting because he has a retrograde Mars in Sagittarius. And I've noticed a lot of people with Mars in Sagittarius or Mars in Leo in leadership right now. There's a fanaticism to people who have Mars in Sagittarius, and his is retrograde. So he's reviewing that energy within him. And you see that it's in trine to transiting Mars conjunct Chiron. So that's another symbol that's playing out in this interview and in what he's building right now. So it'll be interesting to look back on the successes or failures that he experiences with this development of this data center. So I don't want to say that I'm a follower of Tucker, but what he's saying right now sounds very sincere. But from what I'm hearing, he's an opportunist and he's the kind of person that follows the narrative where he can exploit it. But he rightly calls out the hypocrisy of those who once preached the conservation message of climate change. Now they're completely abandoning their concerns because of this irrational obsession over the AI race with China for compute dominance. And Tucker is like, okay, well, why? What is this giving us at the end of the day? You want to beat China, but what for? And he's rightly asking this question. And why are you abandoning what you were telling us just yesterday about your concerns about environmentalism? Tucker is on this rampage about the hypocrisy of the tech world, who used to preach climate change and sustainability and now want to increase our energy consumption as fast as they possibly can. It's true. It's really true that all of the leadership that has been preaching all of this sustainability rhetoric, they've completely changed their tune. And so it makes you wonder, why are we putting our faith into these leaders at all? Are they telling us the truth? Why should we believe them? He talks about how the overall logic makes sense. We want to beat China, but the details are where they get hung up. Why do we want to beat China? For what purpose are we trying to beat China? And are we making this country great again? Are we going to make a country where the people are happy at the end of the day? What's the point of doing this? And what's the point of turning our country into a dictatorship, which is exactly the opposite of what has made our country great in the beginning of this American democracy dream? So this is a really great illustration about Jupiter's transit through gate 62. Gate 62 is about the details, and people need to understand something before they can process it, before they can believe it. And Jupiter is not really that great with details. It wants to sell a vision, but the vision really needs to make sense. It needs to be practically grounded in something that makes sense. And right now, it does not make sense. And there's nobody that is really making sense right now. So Tucker really is calling out something that is true and that is going to bite the leadership eventually. People don't know who to trust anymore because there's this flip-flopping depending on how the wind blows. How can we trust people when they're doing this type of flip-flopping? It's basically, okay, well, what makes us the most money? That's how we're going to come up with our ideology of the moment. We don't trust our business leaders anymore. And with the new moon highlighting Cuba's sun and Mercury within minutes of the country's sun, we heard news that the country's fuel supplies had run out. And the head of the CIA was holding meetings with the government. You see, Saturn is approaching a conjunction of Venus that is here in Cuba's 8th house. So there are restrictions on the funds of the government, and a surrender really does seem imminent, but it may not happen until closer to the Uranus nodal square, which is applying right now. We'll talk about that in a minute. Pairing the theme of the cross of contagion, we also heard about an outbreak of a very serious hemorrhagic virus, Ebola, spreading in the Congo, with the WHO declaring it a public health emergency of international concern the day after the new moon. And you see that this new moon is in square to the Republic of Congo's Sun Uranus conjunction in Leo. So this country is also a Uranian country. And right now, the South Node is coming to a conjunct Venus and Pluto, another Venus and Pluto conjunction here. And so they are experiencing a health crisis. A gray dossier, I'm not sure if you've heard about this newsletter, but you should check it out. She has some very interesting takes. And she sent out a newsletter highlighting a gene sequencing company, Illumin, as one of the businesses invited on Trump's official visit to China. She goes on to talk about certain agreements made with African countries to sequence DNA in the country. And she talks about how certain labs in that country were studying these specific virus strains that have been spreading. And she makes a connection to a recent Senate briefing about the origins of COVID and that Wuhan lab and the controversy that was basically dismissed by the Democrats. There was no Democrats at this Senate meeting. But when she listened to somebody in the Intelligence Committee talking about this Wuhan lab, she felt that there was some truth in it. And she felt that this wasn't or shouldn't be a Democratic Republican issue. Now, this is a whole rabbit hole one could go down. I might dig into this more later, but it opens a whole nother can of worms that is pretty scary when you think about it. But this outbreak follows a similar timeline around the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aries. Both Wade Caves and the Astrology podcast covered this topic in depth. If you want to watch those presentations, I'll link them below. I'll also link the newsletter of the Gray Dossier so you can read it or watch her video for yourself. I want to talk about the Mars-Pluto square that is going to happen on May the 26th, a couple of days after I release this video. But we're already feeling this build up right now. It will perfect next Tuesday, the 26th. And it will continue to get more and more intense as we move toward that perfection. This looked like it could be a further escalation in the Iran war, but the narrative so far doesn't support it. This could change as we move closer to the square this weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if something happened that escalated this conflict once again. But it could also very easily involve Cuba or Greenland. And that's why I want to start with looking at the conjunction, because that is the seeding moment of the opening square. The conjunction happened at the end of the quarter of mutation, right before the start of the human design new year. It happened on the cross of the four ways with themes around our interdependence. And the conjunction happened right after the Alex Preddy shooting, kicking off major civil unrest in Minneapolis. There was also geopolitical tension about Venezuela after the recent capture of Maduro, and a continuing fallout from Trump's repeated threats about Greenland. And you see that all of this energy is focused on the sixth house of this chart. The sixth house rules our armed forces and our other governmental agencies, including ICE. So now we're at the opening square and we're in the quarter of civilization, where we start to build a tangible plan for the future. The square happens on the cross of duality. So we are now dealing with more resistance from the other side, where we need to confront obstacles in order to achieve our goals. This is a period of growth through struggle. You see that Mars is at the top of this chart, and you see that the sun is separating from Uranus now, whereas before it was the moon that was separating from Uranus. So the moon separating from Uranus symbolized the shooting of Alex because Alex was symbolic of the people, and the moon symbolizes the people in mundane astrology. Now we see that with the sun now separating from Uranus, it may involve a shakeup of a public leader because the sun symbolizes the leader of a country. So it may involve a crisis that happens with a leader, especially as we get closer and closer to that square on Tuesday. Now, it's interesting to note that Trump will have his yearly physical on May the 26th. And it's very interesting to look at this chart when you're looking at it from that perspective. Trump's design is very present in this chart, and it speaks to the themes of his increasing isolation. So you see in this chart that the ascendant is at 27 degrees of Capricorn. Now that's the exact degree of the Sibley's natal Pluto. So this chart is very Plutonic. And Pluto is in the first house. It's retrograde, and it is right now very close to the south node of the Sibley chart. So we are revisiting some of the shadows of our past and some of the shadows of power in the United States at this time. And the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, and it sits here in the second house of this standalone chart. And you see that the moon in Libra is applying to an opposition of Saturn and Neptune. And the moon is really highlighting the Sibley's Saturn and also the Neptune of Donald Trump. He's got his Neptune at 5 degrees of Libra. It's in retrograde. And the US Sibley has its Saturn at 12 degrees of Libra. So it's really highlighting that conjunction right now in this chart. And the moon is representative of the people in a mundane chart. It's representative of security. It can be representative of money. It's definitely representative of money in the second and eighth house. It rules the sixth house of our military and ICE and all of our governmental agencies. And it also rules the seventh house of our allies and our known enemies. So we are experiencing an opposition to these themes. And that doesn't look so great because a moon-Saturn opposition is not great news for security of the people and our financial partners. Doesn't look that great. But the moon is also creating this grand trine with Pluto in the first house, this Sun-Uranus conjunction in the fourth house. Recent shakeups at home means that we are looking for security in our external partnerships. It could also point to some health issues, like I mentioned, coming to light, with this latest physical. We are at a crossroads with the current energy crisis, and whatever crises may unfold closer to the Uranus nodal square, which perfects on June the 12th. And Mars, the ruler of the midheaven, is here in the third house. And the third house in a mundane chart represents things like transit, the media, the internet, AI, negotiations, and agreements. Mars is now at the degree where Mercury was when Trump made that surprise announcement that we were going to escort ships through the strait. Mars is not very comfortable in Taurus. Taurus energy slows Mars down. And Mars has to deal with Venus topics, which is not ideal for Mars. Mars just wants to slice through. It wants to go after its target. And Venus wants to do things that are more diplomatically focused first. Cognizant of our relationships. It's focused on our finances. So there's a lot of things that Mars can't do very quickly in Taurus. And the label here at this degree is what's called indiscriminate sharing. And it brings to mind the various corrupt agreements and fraud we are seeing from this administration. It could also be related to negotiations that are continuing with Iran. It might be that Trump negotiates an agreement with Iran that is not well liked by Israel or other factions in the United States. There has been some testy conversations between Trump and Netanyahu about what is acceptable to Israel and what's not. And there's a lot of neocons that will blame Trump if he doesn't get a deal that's better than Obama. So there's a lot on the line with these negotiations. And it could also be that the media leaks are coming under fire during this time because there's been some investigations about media leaks related to this conflict. Gate 27 is related to our defense system, our overall health, and how we nurture our spirit physically, spiritually, and materially. Trump is our mercurial president. He's teaching us about all things related to Mercury, the trickster, the magician, the Maya, propaganda, free speech, and the media, how business has so thoroughly corrupted our politics, and how conmen and gamblers now reign. And Trump's chart is lit up with mercurial aspects right now. Mercury, the ruler of the fifth and eighth house of this chart, is unaspected in this chart, which makes it really stand out and act very independently. It's not reliant on other people's opinions. It's basically going to do what it wants to do outside of any other concerns. Now, Mercury is conjunct Trump's Uranus degree in gate 45. This is the gate of the tribal leader of the material way. And so he's going to do what he thinks is important to him and nobody else. And there might be some unexpected agreements that come out, like I said, that is not in alignment with what other people want. And with Saturn conjunct his design Mercury in the receptive gate, gate 21, it's adding some restrictions or karma related to these financial negotiations, some fallout that happens with these negotiations. Venus is also conjunct his Mercury degree in gate 52. This again suggests certain financial agreements being made. And it may mean that he needs to adjust how he's gaining consensus as his alliances or health start to break down even further. The stock market has been up, so he's been riding on that success as everything else around him starts to tank. When he loses that, he's going to be in serious trouble. By this square, Neptune has transited to gate 17, the gate of opinions that happens on May the 23rd, and it connects Jupiter in gate 63. Now, if you remember from my previous video, this is where Trump has his design Venus in gate 17 and his personality Saturn in gate 62. These transits will amplify his continuing disconnection from reality, unfortunately. And then we experience a Venus square Saturn a couple of days after Mars squares Pluto. So it implies that there will be some either financial or health fallout from whatever happens during that Mars and Pluto square. The conjunction happened on March the 8th, right after the full moon in Virgo. This was during that initial escalation in the Iran war. So might there be some escalation that we're dealing with after the Mars-Pluto square? It could be very likely that that's what happens. Venus is applying to the U.S. Sibley Sun, and the U.S. has a Sun-Saturn square. So this means that the U.S. Sibley's lights are also squaring Saturn from the opposite side. creating a T-square. So the Sibyl has its Saturn in Libra, imagine it right here, and it's squaring Venus from the other side while it's creating an opposition with Saturn. And ironically, where we find relief is from Capricorn. So our laws and regulation. So what happens if our laws and regulations are corrupted? How do we find relief? This is where we're supposed to find relief at the moment. Will that happen, or is it too late? And as you can see, we have the moon in Scorpio at the top of this chart, and it has just opposed Mars in Taurus, right on the IC of this chart. And if you remember, we had the moon in Scorpio in the 2025 solar return of the United States Sibley chart. So we're seeing a manifestation of that moon in this Venus square Saturn. We're seeing the culmination of the power themes that are happening, and also of this lack of power that the people feel in their government, and how the government is spending so much of the people's money, the tax money, and destroying the security of the people. So we're seeing that very present in this chart right now. Finally, we come to the full moon, which is related to the new moon in Sagittarius that happened in December of 2024. So think back to what was happening in your life before Trump took office. It was after he won the election, but before he took office. So much has happened since then. It's hard to imagine what life was like before he took office, right? I mean, he's completely destroyed so many things and added so much chaos and destruction to this country. And so it's really hard to think about. But Mars was slowing down to station retrograde about a week after this new moon. So whatever you meant to start during that new moon might have gotten subverted. Of course, as soon as he took office, it was subverted. So let me ask you, did you get that project back on track, or was it completely subverted by what's been happening? Whatever was started back then had the opportunity to culminate with this full moon. Now, with Mars just past a square to the Mars in Leo back during that new moon, you may have had to confront resources or value issues for whatever it was that you were attempting to start during that new moon. And you see how Mercury is highlighted once again right at the top of this chart. And we are meeting now our spiritual destiny that was started during that new moon, with Neptune now conjunct the north node of that new moon. So on the world stage, the new moon featured the fall of the Assad regime. And that changed a lot of the dynamics in the Mideast, especially the power structure of Russia, because Russia was closely aligned to the old regime, the old Assad regime in Syria. And that broke down and kind of created this power vacuum in the Mideast, and possibly set forth some of the conflicts that we're seeing today. And then there was that martial law crisis in South Korea. And there was a lot of developments that happened after the martial law crisis. But now they're experiencing this oil crisis right now. And then there was the pardon of Hunter Biden. So we saw the seed of the pardon of the president's son, preferential treatment of the president's son. And that has exploded with Trump and his pardons. And then there was the assassination of that CEO of the United Healthcare Company, Brian Thompson. And then Bitcoin hit 100,000 during this new moon. And then they had a big decrease of that peak. They're coming back up a little bit, but it's nowhere near that peak. Google released a microchip advancement. And so I'm suspecting that there'll be some more advancements in our technology that will further decrease some of the investments that we need to make in the microchips that we're making. Maybe that will help ease some of the data center issues that we're all fighting about. We could see that there's either continued fallouts or there's some technological advancements during this full moon, which will open the door to more economic viability for AI companies. Because right now it's very expensive. They're losing a lot of money. They're investing a lot of money, but losing a lot of money. Stagnant energy is often symbolic of our collective beliefs and what we as society agrees is true. And when you think about the extent of what is held together in this collective Maya, which is basically based on this consensus belief, it's really mind-blowing when you think about it. Our monetary system, the USA's leadership on the world stage, it's all based on a shared mythology. The American dream is a shared mythology. It has been eroding over time, but still people have this mirage belief around what's possible in the United States. That's why people were clamoring to come to the United States. They didn't see the reality on the ground. Some of the immigrants that came to the United States, they might have been safer than some of the other countries, but we don't have access to universal health care. We don't have access to some of the protections of other countries, of more advanced countries. We're supposed to be the most advanced country. So it's really the mythology of the United States, this Hollywood vision of the United States that has been breaking down for a long time, but it's really eroding right now. Hollywood is eroding right now. This vision of what's possible in the United States is really vanishing. And it's based on what America symbolizes to the world. So the world is getting a different side of America altogether. And up until now, it's been considered the safest place to keep your assets. And that belief is also being quickly dismantled right now because of the ways that we're spending our money and the fraud that's happening in the leadership. Basically, this wheeling and dealing and fraud that's happening at the top is eroding other people's faith. Remember Kevin O'Leary's comments about why people have flocked to the United States for so long. It's based on this carefully constructed mythology about fairness and the rule of law in the United States. And that is being eroded. That has been purposefully eroded by this administration. What do you think happens after that mythology is destroyed? What do you think happens after we start running our country like a dictatorship? We're basically falling into this trap that imagines if we have this authoritarian leader that will be able to compete with other authoritarian leaders, but it's basically eroding all of what made America what it is today, the envy of other countries. We're basically following the trap that says that if we focus too much on a target, we focus too much basically on China, we become that thing. And so now the United States is becoming a China, it's becoming a Russia because we focused all of our energy on that thing for so long. We're basically becoming that thing. And that's the danger when you focus on negative, when you focus on scarcity, because you can become that thing that you hate. You can become that father that you rebelled against. And that's the lesson of this time. Now, people think that this can't happen, that we can't fall as quickly because there's no other option. They're still under this delusion that there's no other alternative to the US. So we can just take advantage of however we want to take advantage of the world right now to cement our future power. But beliefs can change within the blink of an eye. Markets can drop within a blink of an eye. It's really about the erosion of belief, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And, that's what happened to Britain. And you can argue that it's not the same. We're not in the same place as Britain was when they lost the power. But I would argue that belief is there until it's not. And you never know when that bottom is going to drop away. Why do you think that the elite are allowing and even participating in such a reckless spending spree, racking up an amount of debt at a pace that will make your head spin? We elected a president whose only real expertise is as a con artist, creating money-making schemes and driving various businesses into bankruptcy. It seems we are going all in to bankrupt America right now. Where is the elite going to go next? Are they trying to loot America so that they can follow whatever power structure they want to create next? It's kind of a mystery to me right now. Or they might believe that they're just doing the short-term pain for long-term game narrative. It's very interesting. They think maybe something magical will happen and we'll be able to save ourselves at some point. They don't have to take away our Social Security once they've looted our coffers. There will simply be nothing left for us. And they will have amassed their wealth. And then they'll just use an excuse that, sorry, this other leader did this thing, and now we have no more money left for you. What stood out immediately to me in this full moon chart was this 0-degree Aquarius Leo axis on the midheaven and IC of the chart. Aquarius and Leo are very much present right now because Pluto is in Aquarius, and the United States has its nodes on this axis. And Aquarius is really about the collective needs. It's also about rebellion. It's about rebellion against the elite. It's also very technologically focused. And so there seems to be some kind of reset that's happening. There's also this 0-degree axis on the new moon in Gemini. So we're really looking at these themes in these next 2 moons. And there seems to be some kind of reset. And this reset is also signified by Uranus applying to square the nodes. It perfects on June the 12th. So might this foreshadow some kind of reset within our tech industry, which is very much focused on the collective right now, because it is promising that we will basically not need people anymore because we'll have access to these AI systems that will make humans really irrelevant. That narrative has gotten a lot of pushback from people, of course. And so might there be a reset of that narrative? And it could also be a foreshadowing of the bubble popping or something that happens within the tech industry that resets the narrative. There is this upcoming IPO of SpaceX, which is supposed to happen the day this Uranus square perfects on June the 12th. So might there be something that happens as SpaceX IPOs? I mean, people are suspecting that this is the next big thing. But when you look at it, they're losing billions of dollars. So the finances don't seem to be promising, but there's this delusion in everybody right now that you have to just keep throwing money at this AI technology and eventually it'll pay off. So we'll really see if that is continuing with this IPO, this belief system, which is very present in this full moon in Sagittarius. So it's no wonder why the tech leaders aligned with Trump, because there is no better way to illustrate this type of con game that's happening, this purposeful delusion, than how our tech leaders have approached AI. There's a debate going on right now as to whether we keep needing to spend so much money on this compute and this very slow build out of these data centers. Why are we spending so much money and not getting as much return, even though NVIDIA came out beating expectations? The amount that they're growing really doesn't make sense for the amount of money that we keep throwing at these tech companies. So there's also this reality that China is creating more efficient models in a more competitive environment. And it's like we are switching economic models with China, where we are racking up debt, throwing buttloads of money at a problem, prioritizing expensive monopolies, while China is prioritizing real capitalistic competitive efficiency. Now, China is not a capitalistic country. I realize that. They control their industries at the end of the day, but they're still investing in these startups that are very competitive with each other. So these businesses don't seem to mind, and they're creating efficiencies. Their ability to make use of this technology is so much more advanced because they also have the manufacturing side of the industry. So it's very practical what they're doing. And here we are creating all of this debt within our country and throwing all of this money and investing in these monopolies, which really are not efficient at all. We're going all in on this AI bet. We're throwing billions of dollars in hopes that we'll magically get to this real agentic AI so that we can cement our dominance over China. But is that a reality? Or are we just living in a delusion and we're letting these tech leaders keep deluding us into this fever dream? Remember that the fire horse year is about this fever dream. Are we going to wake up eventually and see that we've basically killed our dominance more quickly because we've made all of these really risky bets at the end of the day that have killed what makes America great, what has made America great, what has fed into the America mythology all of these years. And so we were basically so afraid that we were going to lose our dominance that we've become the countries that we were fighting against for all of these years. Ironic, right? Some theorize that the administration is now trying to make this grand bargain with China because they see the writing on the wall. China is catching up to us, and they are much more capable of leveraging this technology as part of their manufacturing process, like I said. And the administration seems to be leveraging our strength to try to force an outcome with China that cements our leadership or dominance over the country. And there seems to be a lot of moves that are happening right now that seems to be about manufacturing crises to gain leverage, to gain dominance over other countries. There are many countries right now that are very vulnerable because of this energy. There are many countries, especially in the global south, that are very vulnerable because of the energy crisis that we started. And if they are vulnerable, they're naturally put in a place of dependence. And they've been preaching this narrative that says you need to stand on your own, but we're going to force you to become more dependent on us. That doesn't make sense at all. If their very livelihood and their very ability to operate is dependent upon these monopolies, upon these AI companies, upon these powers, these great powers that have dominance over these other countries. How can they be independent? It's like they're preaching this mirage of independence. Yeah, you can't ask for too much, but you must depend on the scraps that we're willing to give you. We basically have dominance and control over you to sap all of your resources, whatever is available. You can't ask for a lot, but you must depend on us. You can't stand on your two feet. You can't ask for a lot in return. We must dominate you. You have to depend on us, but we're basically telling you that you need to survive on your own. How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense, but that's the messaging that we're getting. And we're seeing right now, of course, a ramp up of billionaire rage in our country. And these billionaires seem to be surprised by this for some reason. I'm not sure. They cannot see themselves very clearly right now. They feel entitled. They feel that, hey, this is the next big thing. You better get in line. You better depend on us. You better worship us. And they're not getting that. They're getting resistance instead. And they're confused by that for some reason. We haven't even gotten to Pluto going out of bounds yet. And that happens later this year. And that is going to incite a lot more rebellion by the people when we get there. Time and time again, we're seeing how the use of force is limited, demonstrated by this conjunction of Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. Brute force can only accomplish so much. Real movement and cohesiveness relies on shared belief systems and ideals. And they've eroded that so much with their propaganda and with their narratives that we can't trust the propaganda that's coming out. And so how do you expect to really trust what the government is putting out, to really trust what's coming out in social media? And especially now that AI is ramping up everything, we are going to ignore it all. You know, they have pumped in all of these ads, these AI ads into the Massey campaign. You should have seen some of them. I don't know if you did, but if you didn't, you should watch them because this is the next stage of propaganda. But as people become more acclimated to that, they're not going to trust any advertising. And so we're going to see a collapse of advertising, which might be a good thing. But it's basically putting a lot of distrust in the narrative. We're not going to trust anything anymore. And so it's going to be hard to create that cohesion, to create that coming together over shared beliefs and ideology, which has happened in our country because of this investment in think tanks and in policymakers, which basically put money into this propaganda machine and has worked for many, many years and is no longer working anymore. So when we see the complete breakdown of that, what else is going to actually work in creating that cohesion? I'm curious, are you? Moon, Mercury, and Venus are all out of bounds during this full moon. And the chart is weighted heavily in air. There's been a lot of out of bounds planets lately. Have you felt this energy? I have. I have a lot of people coming at me. Somebody pretty much wigged out because I called her Susan. Her name is Suzanne, same as my name. You know, it's like we're all trying to keep up. And there are people out there that are enraged. And And everybody is kind of going bonkers a little bit, blaming each other. And I was like, hey, just wait a minute. Like, I'm not trying to do this purposefully. I'm not trying to call you another name. That's my name. And I wouldn't do that purposefully. I just made a mistake and people are wigging out. I had another experience that I wasn't privy to, but in a group setting, there was this rebellion that happened out in the open that really brought up to the surface that this group wasn't as supportive as I might have thought it to be when joining the group. So a lot of people are responding in ways that they might not respond if everything was a little bit calmer. So I'm curious to hear your experience. Please give me some feedback. I'd love to hear your stories. But the full moon falls in the 7th house of the standalone chart, and it's in mutual reception with Jupiter in the 3rd house, and Jupiter rules the 8th house of financial partnerships. Jupiter is now in the exact degree of Trump's natal Saturn and the Sibley's Mercury degree. The theme of this placement is around aesthetics or perception of what we represent. It's about withdrawal in pursuit of harmony. Details that can only be expressed after periods of isolation. So it's about our need to isolate ourselves to create this perception of who we are. So we're going to really focus on what we need to focus and come up with a different narrative. And then everyone can perceive us in ways that are harmonious. And the cross of this moon falls on the 5-1 cross of identification. It describes this focus and deep identification on building the infrastructure for an AI boom. It's like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Never mind the details. Let's focus on withdrawal. Let's focus on our own security. Let's focus on isolating ourselves from other countries so we can continue to build something that cements the US as the tech leader it's always been. In addition, Jupiter rules the North Node, which is intercepted in the 11th house. It's the house of our legislature. It's basically the legislature is trying to assert some control, especially over the war in Iran. And it's put out these votes on the Senate floor that has so far not passed. I think they've voted probably 7 times and they just don't have enough votes, but they're getting closer and closer to having the votes. So it'll be interesting to see whether there's some kind of vote that basically eases this interception that's happening within the legislature. And when you look at it in relation to the attack, we're basically in a square to the attack. And so we're at a critical juncture. And in this chart, it does appear that we're able to make some kind of agreement with Venus here in the 8th house and Jupiter here in the 8th house, but also it is about money and it is about our security. Hopefully, we'll be able to come up with some financial agreement that happens so that we can focus on our own country. I think we're coming at a point where Trump has become so unpopular because of this war that there's more and more pressure on him to end it, except from Israel. So that is the major conflict right now because Israel has pumped a lot of money into Trump and Trump's interests. It seems like it would make more sense for us to create some agreement with Iran and withdraw, whether that happens after a final conflict or not. This chart does look promising for something like that to happen.